Middag almal, good afternoon, Molweni. To welcome to all of you. Allow me to single out a few special guests that they have been mentioned already. Advocate Thuli Madonsela, thank you for joining us today. You will see on Tito Mboweni's badge, it says Mr. Tito Mboweni, but when he enters this campus, he's Dr. Tito Mboweni. And Mr. Rolf Meyer, thank you very much for joining us. And you have heard the story how this all started when this man spoke to me in London. And I am happy to see all of you here. And I must tell you that I have read so much about that time now that I feel that I've been in that time myself. En natuurlijk ons eregaste vandag, die Lusaka Maties, also known as the Maties who caused all the trouble. Na alles wat gebeur het, verskaf dit my groot vreugde om vir julle te kan sê welkom. Thuis, julle is destyds bietjie stief behandel as ek alles verstaan wat ek gelees het. Deur die owerhede ook. Nou, intussen het daar baie water onder die brug deurgevloei en dit is vir my 'n riem onder die hart dat julle hier is om nie net terug te dink nie, maar om ons almal te help dink oor wat doen ons vorentoe, waarheen gaan ons, wat moet ons bereik. Welkom aan die twee mense wat julle destyds vergesel het, meneer André Simon en meneer Henny Serfontein. Ek is bly dat julle ook weer hier saam is. Now, it is remarkable to think that the events we are here to commemorate happened so recently. 25 years is not a long time. Yet when one considers the fracas around the trip by Matie student leaders to Lusaka in 1989, it's very clear that we are discussing a completely different time in our history. South Africa was a very different country back then, and the University of Stellenbosch a very different place back then. And it is against this background that your visit to the exiled ANC and others took place. We know it generated a lot of controversy, and I started to ask the question, why did all of that happen? And I thought, why would a government as mighty as the government of that time worry about students doing this? Aren't students and student leaders supposed to take an active interest in society? And have there not been many other safaris to Lusaka and Dakar and Harare for talks with the ANC? So why the fuss about this visit? I think there were two reasons. The one is your youthfulness, and secondly, that you were from this university. As student, you represented the next generation. So if the leaders of tomorrow were starting to think for themselves, the old order's tight grip was clearly slipping away. And as Maties, you represented a university that had been pivotal to the idea of Afrikaner nationalism from the beginning. So if critical voices at Stellenbosch were growing, and if students were thinking out loudly, it would become harder to keep everyone else on song. Nou, ek het gaan lees wat my voorganger destyds gedoen het. Hy was nie baie gelukkig oor die safari nie. Julle het hierdie universiteit tot in sy fondamente geskit en die land ook. Net omdat julle van hierdie universiteit was. Ons het so bietjie in die argiewe gaan rondkrap en afgekom op 'n lang memorandum van professor Mike de Vries, aan die ruiterwag, wat toe die jeugvleuel was van die Broederbond. En dis in sy eie handskrif geskrywe. Dit is in ons argiewe by die universiteit en is gedateer 9 Mei 1989. Hy sê die jaar 1989 was vir hom 'n laagtepunt. En ek haal aan sy eie woorde, hy sê, die IS begin seer kry. IDASA reël byeenkomste, spog reël toere, NUSAS demonstreer en die SR verbreek hul vertrouensverhouding met my persoonlik. En dan vra hy 'n groot vraag, quo vadis Stellenbosch? Waarheen, nou sê hy so, waarheen is jy op pad, my universiteit? Where are you going to my university? En dan kom die insiggewende deel, hy lewer 'n pleidooi vir, en dit is byna asof hy sê, ek aanvaar dinge gaan verander, ek aanvaar julle is nie rassiste nie, dit is waarom julle hierdie dinge doen, ek aanvaar dit, maar ek wil vra julle moet asseblief die beskawingswaardes behou. En dan maak hy 'n lys van beskawingswaardes. Hy sê, die eerste is die Christelike godsdiens. Moet dit nie asseblief ook nog dit ook gaan weggooi nie. En die tweede is gesonde gesagsverhoudinge. Die derde is gedissiplineerde vryheid. En verder 'n verantwoordelikheidsin en pligsgetrouheid. En selfs eerbied vir die instelling van die huwelik. Dit is baie interessant. The respect for marriage. But it is, but when I read sometimes a newspaper nowadays, I think, goodness me, we're talking about the same things again. Now, there's nothing wrong with these values per se, but I think what students were reacting to was a disconnect between values and reality. It doesn't help that you acknowledge values, but you live differently from that. That was what sparked outrage on campuses across the country, including here at Stellenbosch. And it was a moral outrage. You guys wanted to do your bit to help fix the morality of that was so obviously wrong with South Africa. For that, we owe you a debt of gratitude, again, not because you spoke to the ANC per se, but because you took the lead in doing the right thing despite the cost to yourself. You were young and should not have been asked to do something like that. But you showed us the way for young people in the future of this country. Hulle het sê hulle het as bogsnyters vreemde goed gedoen. En julle die volksvaders duidelik erg gegrief. Luister bietjie na die burger se kommentaar via Dawie se pen. Julle weet nou Dawie, wie is Dawie, wie weet nou. Hy skryf, amateurs moet uit die politieke arena pad gee, sodat die ervare professionele manne sake kan hanteer. En hy was kwaad dat 8 van die 18 Lusaka Maties vroue studente was. Dit was nou 'n groot fout. Hy het sy paternalistiese onderrok laag laat uithang. Now, your actions in 1989 was a turning point for this university, just as June 16 was a turning point for the University of the Western Cape and for the country as a whole. Stellenbosch should never be the same after your trip to Lusaka. In fact, in many ways, we are still riding the waves of those changes that you set in motion by your decision to stand up and speak out, by your decision not to be only objects of the reality, but subjects of the reality. A quick quote: Stellenbosch is often portrayed as having been the quintessential cradle of apartheid. But there were many critical voices here through the years, and we are here to acknowledge them all. You have seen the petition outside that was sent to the Rector, Professor Mike de Vries, in those days after your visit to Lusaka. It was sent to support your work by staff members of this university, people from the library, working in the library, to the professors at the university, throughout the university. En dis deur 167 personeellede reg deur die universiteit onderteken. Die petisie is hier buite, because we must remember them as well. So the pressure for change kept mounting, and eventually this old institution would catch up with its young Turks. In 1999, your alma mater finally acknowledged, and I quote, its contribution to the injustices of the past. And this is contained in an important Stellenbosch University policy document, our strategic framework for the turn of the century and beyond. Broad and deep discussion that led to the university taking responsibility for its past and for its role in the injustices of this country. And this was its apology, publicly stated in that document. And one cannot repeat it often enough. But the university didn't stop there. It also committed itself to redress and to development. Redress referred specifically to access. In 1990, Stellenbosch had just 762 black students. Today we have more than 9,000, or roughly a third of our student body. By 2018, we will stand at a different place. And regarding the commitment to development, it laid the foundation for our attempt to use science to broaden the footprint in society and make our world better, a better place, and our country a better place. To grow from success to significance. That is why we started the HOPE project. And now, in our own Vision 2030, we have committed the university to become more inclusive, more innovative, and more future-focused. Never again do we want to be a university only serving a section of the population. We are, and we want to be, a national asset. Stellenbosch is nie meer volksbesit nie. Ons behoort nou aan almal, aan die wêreld en aan die land, en al sy mense. En julle het ons daardie kopskuif help maak. En as ek vandag hier is en as gasheer probeer optree vir hierdie geleentheid, is dit net om dankie te sê, dat julle die subjekte was van die veranderinge wat hierdie universiteit gesien het. You showed true thought leadership and left a valuable legacy for future generations. You chose to examine life critically and to be active and engaged citizens. These are the attributes that we hope every Matie would have developed by the time they graduate. The country certainly needs thought leaders for the future. 20 years into our democracy, a lot has been achieved in our country, but many challenges remain, both old and new. And the way to make a difference is to think critically, engage with society and its institutions, act courageously, as you did. Dit geld ook hierdie universiteit. Ons is dalk in 'n heel ander tydvak, maar dit beteken allerminst daar is nie meer brandpunte op kampus nie. Daar is byvoorbeeld die vraagstuk oor simbole. Stellenbosch staan lankal nie meer vir D.F. Malan se 1913 idee van hoër onderwys net vir die Afrikaner volk nie. En ons moet hard werk en hard dink en saamdink oor ons simbole en ons geskiedenis. En vandag is 'n goeie dag om dit ook saam met mekaar te doen. Dit het weer tyd geword om metaforiese grense oor te steek en waagmoedige gesprekke op te soek. En ek sal graag wil hoor wat julle oor al hierdie dinge dink in vandag se deelname. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce someone who is in many ways the conscience of a nation, a representative of the way we see our future, a person who must stand out and speak for all of us, South Africa's public protector, advocate Thuli Madonsela. She's a human rights lawyer and equality expert who drafted our country's constitution. She did a BA law at the University of Swaziland and an LLB at Wits, more or less at the time of the Lusaka safari. Her keynote address is titled, Bold Leadership Standing Up for What is Right, No Matter What the Cost. So without further ado, please welcome Advocate Madonsela.
Thank you, Professor, for that very kind introduction. Professor Russel Botman, Vice-chancellor of the University of Stellenbosch, former governor of the Reserve Bank, Dr. Tito Mboweni, the leadership of Stellenbosch University, the former students of Stellenbosch University who undertook the tour to Lusaka in 1989, who are here with us today, esteemed members of the panel, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. What an honor it is for me to take part in this reunion, which marks the 25th anniversary of the visit to the ANC in Lusaka by a delegation from the student union at this university, Stellenbosch University. Understand that our dialogue today is part of the Stellenbosch Thought Leadership Series. We should commend Stellenbosch for presenting a platform for dialogue which allows thought leadership by students to go beyond university walls. While sitting, waiting for my opportunity to come to the podium, I was privileged to go through some of the photographs of the historic visit to Lusaka, which former Governor Tito Mboweni generously shared with me. I actually think they should have been blown up and put around the wall. At the core of that visit is an act of leadership by young people. Also at the core of the story is the courage to step out of line. Young people took a bold step to go and engage an organization perceived then as the enemy of the state and presented by the apartheid state as the enemy of the people. Today we know that the ANC was not the enemy of the people, but the apartheid state told us so. Think about it. If those young people didn't step out to find out for themselves and not let government think for them, where would we be? Have you wondered what drove them? Where did they find the courage to do what they did? Where did they find the courage to act in accordance with their own understanding of right and wrong? Again, which understanding of right and wrong was different from that of the government of the day. Perhaps some of them are going to help us because they are here with us today. They will provide answers to these questions. As we gather this afternoon, an esteemed veteran of South Africa's struggle for freedom is being buried at Edusha, the Eastern Cape. I thought I should take this opportunity to wish former President Thabo Mbeki, his wife Mrs. Zanele Mbeki, and his brother Moeletsi Mbeki, and the rest of the Mbeki family and Eastern Cape community comfort as they lay to rest one of our country's unsung heroes, Mrs. Epanate Mbeki. We also mourn this week the passing away of one of the Raivona trialists, Mrs. Aisha Dawood, who also passed on last week and is being buried. Again, we wish her family well and that they should take comfort from the fact that she lived a significant life and she has left this world a better place than she found it. We'll always remember the sacrifices of these people. To them we owe our constitutional democracy, and to them we owe the fact that South Africa today is a country founded on the rule of law, human rights, and respect for human dignity. Developments in human history have always depended on thought leadership. Without courageous people, usually young people, being prepared to step out of line, we wouldn't be talking about concepts such as democracy. It took people like Plato, Aristotle, and others to think beyond what was considered normal during their times. We were talking with former Governor Mboweni, and he mentioned Galileo, who I was thinking about on my way here, that had he not stepped out of line and deviated from scientific thought of the day, we would still be thinking that the world is flat. But he did step out of line at a huge cost to himself. And because of that, though, we have a better understanding of our world, and we're better able to manage our existence as human beings. A few weeks ago, I talked about a poem by James Kinney. The independent newspapers, if you are here, it's not about the ANC. Life does not revolve around the ANC. I spoke about that poem generally about how often we leave our fate to others when it's really within our hands to make a difference and save ourselves and others. That poem is about 6 people trapped by happenstance. It's a dark, cold, bitter night, and all of them have a log or a piece of wood, and there's a fire that is dying. All of them chose not to use their log for some or other reason. And because of that, the fire died, and you obviously know what their fate was. They died. The poem is called The Cold Within. The first person didn't use his log because he didn't want somebody from a different racial group to benefit from the fire. He was black. The second person would not let somebody benefit from a church that wasn't his own. The third person was poor, and he thought if he used his log, the rich person sitting across the fire would benefit. He decided to withhold his log. The fourth person was black. He looked at a white person across and decided to keep his log. The fifth person was rich. He looked at the poor person, not knowing that the poor person had withheld his own log because he didn't want the rich person to benefit. He withheld his log. The last person was a mercenary who would never do anything but for instant gain. He looked around and thought nobody was going to pay him for his log, and he decided to keep it. And as a result, nobody used their log, and the fire died. When I used the poem then, I was talking about what's happening in South Africa today, in families, in organizations, and in the country and the world, where people are not taking action and blaming someone else, and inviting people to think about the role they could play. But today, we're looking back 25 years after these young people, many of them old enough to be my children, really, at the time. Because my children are around exactly the same ages as these young people. When we're reflecting on what they did, we can look back at what we're doing now and think about this poem. They sat there, they thought there was a fire around, and that fire was dying. And they didn't let somebody else think for them. They thought they needed to find out about the ANC and make up their mind what needed to be done to take South Africa forward. Obviously, South Africa 25 years later faces different challenges. During apartheid, we looked at the enemy as the system. But I remember we used the word the system, actually, the 60s. But what is the enemy today? Often, the enemy is posed as white people or posed as black people, depending on who's speaking. It would be interesting to look at the next generation of student leaders. Who do you see as the enemy? Isn't it perhaps that the enemy is within us? It is what we're failing to do or what we're doing that is the enemy. "20 years into democracy, South Africa remains an unequal society, a society that is considered one of the most unequal societies in the world. Why is it so? Is it because of bad governance? But what about instances such as Marikana? Are we going to blame everything on government? We knew that our industries were built on structural inequality based on race. It was our job to reflect on that structural inequality and do something about it. Have we done enough? Why is it that we have a Promotion of Equality Act that has not been implemented? Can we blame government? What about the rest of us that know that the act exists? A whole chapter 5 of the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act has not been implemented. Yet that was the chapter that was supposed to allow us to reflect on the legacy of unfair discrimination and then take measures progressively to deal with the impact in all areas of life. That obviously would include Marikana, among other things. As I've indicated, thought leadership has been at the fore of society developing. But thought leadership like these young people has often meant that people step out of line, and there are consequences for stepping out of line. Some of the respected leaders in the world were thought leaders that started their leadership journey at universities. Former President Nelson Mandela, his friend O.R. Tambo, the US President Barack Obama, the librarian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, to mention but a few. Reflecting on 25 years of the Lusaka visit, I thought we should ponder today, what should student leaders be doing? What role should they be playing? Particularly as I've indicated that some of our challenges relate to the fact that we have not yet attained the inclusive society that we committed ourselves to become. You'll recall that in the Constitution, particularly the preamble, we commit ourselves to be a society that is inclusive, based on social justice and improved quality of life for every person, human dignity, equality, and the freed potential of every person. How do we play our part to make that happen? Incidentally, for young people, our dialogue today takes place during Youth Month. In 2 days, the country will be taking time off to remember and pay tribute to the young people who died in 1976, also for taking bold leadership steps in pursuit of their own destiny. We know that what happened to them then was the state reacted with anger and unleashed its might over them, leading to many lives being lost. Nearly 4 decades later, and 20 years into democracy, we have to pause and ask ourselves, what are young people doing today? I have visited several universities in my life as public protector and before, and I found that there's still the same vibrancy, the same vibrant intellect and the same debates that are taking place at university. And I am convinced that our lives are in good hands. But the challenges are different today. You'll agree with me that we don't need any more Madibas. We don't need any more Tambos, Helen Suzmans, Charlotte McGregors. We need the same thinking, the same willingness to think for yourself and to step out of line. In what way should you be stepping out of line today? Well, it is often said that great changes come from actions that are considered small. We've heard about what happened after Lusaka, like a snowball, really. A lot of things started happening from what staff did here to a debate across the nation. If you think you're too small, think of a mosquito. And these young people didn't think they were too small. They took action and change followed. To those of us, young people at university today, what could you possibly do? Well, I think firstly, don't look the other way. How often do we observe racial confrontations in society and look the other way? How often do we see discrimination on the basis of gender and do nothing? Just About 6 weeks ago, a young person called a woman a whore just because she expressed a particular political view. I didn't see national outrage. That young person is a deputy minister today. I haven't heard this nation saying, please apologize. Are we debating it in the corridors of our universities? It is often said that evil triumphs, not because it's powerful, but because those of us who can challenge it look the other way. How often do we look the other way? When we see others being harassed on the basis of gender, of race, or religion. And how often do we keep quiet when our friends denigrate others on the basis of ethnicity, nationality, or disability? But it's not just discrimination. There's also issues such as corruption and unethical conduct in our companies, in civil society, and within the state. Do we look the other way when these things happen? History has taught us that there can be no peace anywhere as long as there is injustice somewhere. This message was a rallying cry at a conference I attended, organized by the Tolbeck Foundation in Sweden last year. We were reminded that as long as there's inequality and oppression somewhere in the world, the rest of the world cannot be at peace. We're also reminded that globalization is a reality. Instead of trying to fight globalization, we've got to make peace with it. And part of making peace with globalization is to make sure that we play our part in ending troubles in the world, such as war, poverty, disease, and inequality. Some of us, for example, might think Marikana is between industry and platinum miners. Is it? We're being told today that we may be on the verge of a recession, and it's been said that Marikana has had something to do with that. That means we have a role to play to create a better world here in South Africa and anywhere in the world. That's a challenge for today's thought leaders, and I think it's a challenge they are meeting. It's just that platforms such as we are having today should probably, Professor Botman, be extended to the rest of society, and that we should hear what is happening in academia. Whenever I've been with students, I have noticed that they are dealing with these difficult issues. We're just not hearing them. And it would be nice to hear them so that as a snowball, more people could key into better thinking regarding how do we deal with the challenges that face us. Initially, I thought I would discuss what is leadership, but I have chosen not to discuss it because there are many definitions of it. However, what I would like to leave us with is the difference between leadership and misleadership. During apartheid, there was misleadership. And these young people decided to break away. They didn't break away from the state, they didn't break away from society, but they just decided to think for themselves, to give themselves an opportunity to hear from the other group, and to give themselves an opportunity to find out what role could they play in taking us forward as a society. I think it's the same challenge that young people have today. It's the challenge to find out where is society, what problems are we facing, and what difference can we make. Miles Monroe talks about societies such as ours as being in a state of the wilderness, like the children of Israel, where Moses led the children of Israel out of Egypt, but once they were in the desert, a different kind of leadership was needed. Would you agree with me that we are in the wilderness in some ways? Would you agree with me that the young leaders in our universities and other places are presented with an opportunity to be the Joshua generation, I believe they have the ability to be the Joshua generation, because the kind of leadership that took us out of apartheid needs to be tweaked to find the leadership that builds a united and prosperous South Africa. Madiba says, I quote, "I'm not free if I'm taking away someone's freedom, just as I'm not free when my freedom is taken away from me." We can only be free together, and we can do so if we deal with all of these challenges with open hearts and open minds. Thank you.